Hello! This is part 2 of building an animatronic prairie dog. So in part 1 we looked at why I was building an animatronic prairie dog and what we've already built so far. So make sure you go watch that first, but as a quick recap, I wanted to build an animatronic prairie dog for my grandma for Christmas because she loves prairie dogs. And so far we have a lifting mechanism so the prairie dog can pop out of its hole and go back down. And as promised in the last video, there's no math in this one. So in this video, we're going to look at how the arms of him lift and how his nose wiggles. So we'll start by describing the mechanisms that connect to the stuffed animal, then we'll discuss how the mechanisms connect to the servos. So to start, we'll look at where we left last time. We have the lift mechanism and a platform on top. So on top of that platform, there is a rectangular cardboard tube that is attached that is 6 inches tall. It's 6 inches tall because the prairie dog is 6 inches tall. So it's made out of cardboard, which is potentially the worst material for longevity and strength ever. But I'll have you know, it is surprisingly strong and it shouldn't ever be touched again because it's inside the stuffed animal. So I think it's going to last a good time. And on top of that, printing it would have taken like 10 hours and be like 10 times heavier too. So that's a no-go. On top of the cardboard, there are 3D printed rings that the mechanisms get attached to. These rings took a few iterations to get right, because in the first attempt I made the walls way too thick because I wasn't sure how strong the 3D print was going to be, and it deformed the back of the prairie dog's head and his sides, because it was so thick that it stretched out the skin and just made everything look really bad. So my next iteration was to make it like a third the width and fillet all the corners so they're all rounded and nice, and that was just about right, and once I stuffed it at the end it looked perfect. Attached to the rings are extrusions on one side, like little jutty out points. The extrusion, or jut, has a hole running through it that acts as a pivot point for the two mechanisms, because they're both basically just rotation. And through that hole runs a D-shaft that transfers torque across the shaft into the mechanisms from the servo drives. The nose mechanism is actually quite simple. It's just a piece of plastic that rotates off the joint on the jutty out point, and his nose wiggles because the plastic 3D printed part rubs against the skin. The hardest part about getting the nose mechanism right was trying to find the right distance from the cardboard tube for the nose mechanism to stick out. If it was too short, the plastic bit didn't actually touch his skin, and it didn't look like he was actually wiggling his nose. But if it was too long, it stretched out his entire head, made it really narrow, and left big prints, and you could see all the mechanisms through the skin. So that's no good. Now the arm mechanism works a little bit differently. It consists of one much longer rod and two 3D printed arm mounts that go into the fabric arms. The first difficulty with the arms is finding the right size for the inserts, so the part that actually connects to the arms on the prairie dog. The next part was trying to figure out at what angle the arm should mount, and this took like 7 iterations, but I found that the best angle was slightly outwards, because that's the natural direction of his fabric fur, and slightly downwards so that the servo could get the most range of motion out of it, along with not having to put too much torque into it. Another problem with the arm mechanism is that if I left the arms attached before I put the skin on, it wouldn't actually be able to slide over. So what I had to end up doing was take the arm inserts, pull them off the D-shaft, put them in the fabric skin while I put it on, and then as I put the fabric skin on, I stretch it around the big D shaft that the arm's attached to. And then once I have the skin on, I can move his arms around so that I can get the arm inserts that are in the fabric arms onto the D shaft and connected to the servos. So at this point we have the nose and arm mechanisms, and we have 2 servos, but they're not connected. So how are we going to connect them? My first thought was Bowden cables. Now, if you're not sure what a Bowden cable is, go check out my other video on it. But wait, before you go, this is very important. Come back here after you've seen that video, because you're watching that video to learn about this video, right? So you don't just want to leave. Am I right? Or am I right, you know? Okay, so, Bowden cables. I wanted to use them because I could just kind of throw the servo at a different spot, like down underneath the platform, and have the Bowden cables run up to the nose and arm mechanisms. And this would have been nice because the servos were out of the way of sight and didn't prevent the prairie dog, and they wouldn't overheat because they're not in the prairie dog surrounded by stuffing. But there was a slight problem. Remember everything I said that could be potentially harmful in my Bowden cable video? Like the string could stretch, there would be no torque transferred because the string was stretching, and the string was stretching, and most importantly, the string was stretching. Yeah, so the string stretched. It was the cheap $2 fishing line from Walmart. So that did end up being the wrong stuff. So I figured, okay, this is fine. Let's just use some better line. So I ended up getting some Dyneema, which is like really high strength, no stretch fishing line, also known as high density, high molecular weight density. Some nice acronym. I'll include it in the. I'll put it on screen here because I can't remember it right now. So Dyneema is really cool. It basically looks like a thick thread, and it doesn't stretch at all. So I ended up with a spool rated for 80 pounds, so it could hold 80 pounds of force, with a diameter of 0.48 millimeters. And I thought, oh yeah, this is just going to slide right into a 0.6 diameter tubing. No, that's wrong. Does not work. So it turns out a tenth of a millimeter clearance, not enough for this stuff. So I figured, all right, I can make this work. Let's burn the edge. Make it nice. Nope, that just mushroomed out, made it worse. So, shoot, what does the internet say to do at this point? Alright, use some beeswax. Sure, perfect. Wrap the wire in beeswax? That's not a word. Coat it in beeswax, try to slide it in? Nope, that wire is just too thick. Not good. So a few deep breaths, and I'm back. This Dyneema isn't going to work with the tubing in the future that I bought. But in the future, I think what's going to be best is to buy thicker tubing and put the Dyneema in it, because that doesn't have any stretch or anything like that. But for this experiment, I found this nice thread. I'm not entirely sure what it's called, but we have it for sewing sails back together, or sewing sails back together. Alright, this slips right into the tubing. It has very minimal stretch, so all we need to do is reassemble with the sail thread. But nothing is ever that simple. Never. Because of how thin this tubing is, it just bends around and kinks, and just instead of the string stretching, basically the tubing is stretching at this point. Alright, so there's got to be a quick fix for this. So I tried hot gluing the tubing to the wall of the cardboard tube so that it couldn't bend or kink. But that's just still not good enough. There's still some point where it can bend or move or stretch. And apart from completely coating it in like super glue, there's no way I think I can get around it. So, in the end, I had to give up the idea of using Bowden cables in the Prairie Dog. But I think in the future it's still good to use just thicker tubing and thicker cable. I should have just started with thicker stuff to begin with, but we know now. And I know that stuff should work because I've seen other people use it in all sorts of mechanisms. But what are we going to do about the Prairie Dog now that we don't have any Bowden cables to work with? Well, I decided to just use direct 4-bar linkages. This is basically as simple as it can get because you just have the servo pushing on a bar, and then that bar pushes on a linkage connected to the D shaft, which makes the whole thing rotate. The only thing simpler than this would be to put the servos directly on the joints, but there's not enough room in that for the Prairie Dog. So I know it's the simplest solution, but sometimes the simplest solution is just the best. So, with that fairly simple conclusion of the arms just working now with a 4-bar linkage, much simpler than anything we could do with Bowden cables, I'm going to end that video here. So now we have the lift mechanism and the arms and nose working. All we have left is to look at the electronics in him, what kind of box we're going to put him in, his final assembly, and then finally we need to look at the animations I made for him. So make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell icon. That's important so you actually see the videos. So subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when part 3 comes out and any other future I make is released. See you next time.